of food tourism in Scotland's recovery post-Covid-19. I'm Heather Ratt, marketing team at Interface, and I've got my colleagues Leslie Judge of Sector Engagement for Tourism and Alina Mason, who will be hosting today's webinar. We're delighted to welcome our 4 guest speakers who will be offering different perspectives on the business opportunities and challenges for food tourism and into the future. We hope that this provides some inspiration for the new norm as businesses start to think about how they fit into post-COVID Scotland. Just to provide some housekeeping for this morning, you can use the chat function, which is available through the panel at the bottom, to ask any questions throughout the session, and they'll be answered at the Q&A at the end of all of our speakers. Please include your business name when asking the question, and we can refer to you during that Q&A session. We'll also be running a poll during the session, and you'll be able to interact with that. That will be displayed on your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted online afterwards. I'll now hand over to introduce today's webinar and our guest speakers. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. Okay, my name's Leslie Judge, and I work in Sector Engagement for Tourism at Interface. You can get in touch with me via email, or my details are on the website, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. For those of you who aren't aware of Interface, we provide a free impartial service to individuals, organisations, businesses of all sizes in all sectors across the country. We match them to Scotland's universities, colleges, research institutes, and world-leading academic expertise for a variety of different projects. The academics we work with teach and carry out research, but they're also interested in applied research. So looking into an idea or a challenge that somebody has, researching a solution, making sure it's practical to implement. Next slide, please, Heather. In our 15th year, which is this year, to date, we've introduced over 3,000 Scottish SMEs to academic partners, and we've got over 2,300 projects with academic partners off the ground. And on our website, you'll find lots of case studies to get an idea of how businesses have benefited from being matched with academic expertise. So how can businesses benefit? Well, our team is spread across Scotland, so we get to know areas and businesses better that way. The projects that we've helped to develop have supported new product development, access to new markets, new processes, increased revenue and profits, new ways of doing things. And collaboration with academic and industry partners is very important to us. We believe it's an important way to help apply and develop innovation for the recovery of the sector. With that in mind, I'm really delighted to welcome our speakers today. Fiona Richmond, Head of Regional Food, Scotland Food and Drink. Chris Mull, Head of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Robert Gordon University. Dr. Julie Clark, Senior Lecturer, Division of Social Sciences at the University of West of Scotland. And Lorna Young, Marketing and Business Development Consultant and co-author of Savour the Flavours. Dr. Julie Clark's co-author of the paper that's relevant to her talk today is Dr. Gareth Rice, also of the University of West of Scotland, and he'll be on hand for our Q&A. Our speakers will be offering different perspectives on the business opportunities and challenges for food tourism right now, and how it can help act as a driver for Scotland's tourism recovery post-COVID-19. So over to our first speaker to set the scene, Fiona Richmond of Scotland Food and Drink.
Thank you, Leslie. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. So just wanted to start, Heather, if you could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, okay. Just to kind of cast our minds back to kind of the pre-COVID world when ourselves at Scotland Food and Drink and our partners at the Scottish Tourism Alliance were making a really big noise around food tourism and the opportunity for Scotland. Those of you who attended the STA conference in March will remember we had speakers from all around the world, from Flanders to down to Bristol, Borough Market in London, Iceland, Ireland, all talking about the kind of great buzz and excitement around food tourism, which is now being taken really seriously by destinations around the world, because it's recognised that by developing food tourism, you attract more visitors, you increase spend, it's good for the economy, it's good for culture, it's good for local pride. Many, many reasons why food tourism is important. So Food travel, which is a relatively new concept, has developed a lot in recent years, and I suppose the kind of big shift in the past couple of years is that it is now mainstream. It was initially kind of a quite niche activity, just done by a smaller number of people and a certain type, but it's actually something that most visitors do. And we know very clearly that visitors are looking for rich experiences in the destination, and they will travel from this of all travellers research food donation. More than half of all travellers are culinary travellers, are pretty much the same with those who've got particular interest in drinks. And food tourism, as we've seen, as it has evolved over the years, it's a trend that doesn't go away, but it continues to evolve. I always remember JP McMahon, who's quite a celebrated chef in Galway, who's done so much to put Galway on the map as a food tourism destination. I remember him saying at a conference just how important it was to develop food tourism that appeals to your locals and your community. Don't just develop something for international visitors, and how true that has now become. And I think that those who have done that will obviously stand them in good stead in this period and beyond. So we also know that, again, a recent trend when the words local and authentic have been used over and over again, it's actually expected by visitors now. So for businesses just promoting themselves on local, authentic, using those words, we know that they need to go a little bit deeper because they are now kind of expected by our travellers. Next slide. And many of you will be familiar with this. Of course, this is not new research. This is developed a few years ago from visitor surveys, but it was just to remind you all of the kind of Scottish picture. Visitors, in general, don't come to Scotland for food and drink, but we know that when they do come here, they obviously 100% of visitors, eat out and enjoy food and drink. But the research, as many of you will know, is that the expectations are exceeded. So visitors usually return home feeling, wow, we didn't realise Scotland had, amazing seafood or whatever it may be. But certainly we know that was something that we wanted to work on. We want to kind of challenge that perception around our food and drink and encourage more people to come here for the food and drink experiences that await them. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So where does that all leave us now? That was obviously from a kind of a pre-COVID world. And, like everyone else just now, we're kind of living day by day. We don't know what the future holds. But what we do know, I think, and again, these are some predictions from the World Food Travel Association. We know that, and I'm quite certain that our love of good food and drink won't change. As we're saying about food tourism continuing to evolve, and this is yet another new phase. But I think we've all seen round about us over the past few months that incredible interest in our local food and our producers, who made it, how they made it. We've all been kind of lapping up these stories and felt an even closer connection to the people around us who produce our food. For a number of reasons, but I think many people have realised the kind of insecurity of, in many ways, the global food supply, and have been looking a bit closer to home for the food and drink producers and really wanting to support them. So you'll see some of these predictions, which I won't read out, but some will kind of resonate with you around, smaller companies, the opportunity for them to kind of gain market share. You'll all be familiar, I'm sure, with stories in your own communities around that. Businesses have really kind of knuckled down, very, very quickly adapted their business model in kind of record time to develop opportunities, experiences and products, for customers. So I've seen that adaptation kind of day in and day out. Obviously, health and safety, you're going to see that kind of top of the list for any these kind of traditional events where, tastings and things, they're all kind of going to obviously change. But I think we really believe that developing and diversifying our business offer does represent, a really huge opportunity, and we absolutely know that there's a consumer demand for food and drink experiences, whether that's virtual or in person. And it's worth saying at a national level in Scotland Food and Drink and Scottish Tourism Alliance, our kind of ambition for Scotland to be a global food tourism destination, which you've heard us go on and on about over the past couple of years, that absolutely still stands. We believe that's an ambition that can be realised, and our commitment to food tourism as ever. Next slide. Next slide. And I think this kind of campaign that I just want to quickly mention now sort of really exemplifies, I think, what I was just talking about. I hope some of you have had the chance to tune in to the live farm tours over the past few months. So Caroline Miller, who's behind Go Rural brand, she's been a big champion of over a number of years, and Scottish Agritourism is now actually officially a sector group that sits under the Scottish Tourism Alliance. But Caroline, kind of very quickly, kind of after the pandemic started, realised that there was an opportunity to bring farms to the public and those farm experiences to people across the country and beyond. So what she started was with a 2-week lambathon campaign. So the public were able to kind of log into Facebook to experience that lambing from wherever they were, which turned out to be a huge success. And because of its popularity, that campaign developed into daily Welcome to My Farm events. And the results is all over Scotland, so farms participated, and the whole kind of campaign just grew and grew and grew. And it was interesting to see that the public were engaging in this from across the UK, from Canada, America, Australia, all across the world. So I think that just proves that there is a way to connect with our potential visitors, people who are interested in Scotland, getting a real taste of what we have got here. And I think there's about at least 80 farms have participated so far. And the kind of research, Caroline's research, shows that what people liked most was seeing different kinds of farms from across the country. They liked learning the family farming story. They liked hearing about, food and drink. And the results also have showed that it has increased people's likelihood of visiting a farm in the future, going to a farm shop, or going to a cafe. So this campaign in its kind of latest phase is also now doing lunch on my farm. So not only can you enjoy that kind of behind the scenes farm tour, but you can watch a local chef cook up some dishes and get that whole complete food, drink and farming experience. And so just to reiterate, I think this campaign has demonstrated, along with many other great initiatives, that there is that consumer demand for experiences. And certainly when it comes to the agritourism, big opportunity. It's probably a little bit more underdeveloped in Scotland, but I think this campaign and the work of Caroline and her team, I think show that agritourism is just going to grow and grow and grow. Next slide. Okay, many examples from across the country and across the world about how food tourism events and projects have changed kind of over COVID. A travelling spoon is a really great concept. A lovely lady called Aisha behind this, and her kind of strapline is travel off the beaten path. She essentially connects travellers with hosts in countries across the world, and it is actually something she wanted to bring to Scotland, and hopefully will at some stage. But obviously with people not travelling anymore, what she has done is taken this online, so you can now enjoy in the comfort of your own home, cooking, making gnocchi with chincea or going to India or Mexico, all around the world, and you get that real kind of genuine experience with a local host. So
thank you so much, Fiona. We're just aware of time,
okay,
so that's. I don't mean to cut you off because the participants will get your slides, but we're so tight with time that we're going to have to move on. So
okay, just quickly,
thank you so
just
much.
on the last slide, and we can circulate some of these, examples after. Just moved quickly to the last stage. I kind of want to stress there's a number of things that you can do and your businesses can do. In number one, we know that businesses are not as they're not online as much as they should be. I think less than 20% of experiences are bookable. So we'd urge businesses to get online and make sure that they are bookable. We can go over this later, but storytelling, tell your story. People are hungry for that, the backstory of your business and product. There's a number of campaigns and projects that we're running. We can circulate. We've got some digital marketing workshops coming up. Be creative, work with others, grab the opportunity, and just don't sit back. And then hopefully we'll attract visitors when travel starts to pick up again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, everyone will get the slides and lots more follow-up information from all the speakers after the webinar. So thank you very much, Fiona. Now I'd like to introduce Chris Mull, who's Head of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Robert Gordon University. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much. Just unmute myself. Welcome everybody. It's nice to meet you virtually. I'm going to start my presentation with a poll. And I'm going to ask you to do some work. So I hope that you have all got up bright and early. I'm going to ask you a question. Would you radically change your business model? Actually, if you go on to my next slide, I think I've got the question on the slide. So would you radically change your current business model to one where you shift to a new one? So examples of new ones might be you're a niche player and you want to shift to a mass market. You have a high cost base, you want to shift to a low cost base. Maybe you're producing a product, but you want to move to a recurring service. You're a B2B business, but want to move to B2C. And maybe you have a low customer touch and want to move to a high customer touch. So if you could you've now got a few seconds. If you could vote on that, yes, maybe, no, not just now, no, it's fine how it is. And submit and we can see what your current thinking is. Because we're living in interesting times, and it's going to be interesting to see how people return to this kind of what they're calling the new normal. How are we doing with the voting? Hopefully you've had an opportunity to vote.
Yes, 3 more seconds.
Cool. There we go. So interesting. I don't know if you could see that. 32% said yes, you would. 50% said maybe, and then the two no's kind of 10%. So the majority of you are interested in, and I know that you're from a diverse, different types of organizations, but really interesting. It seems that there's kind of an appetite maybe that, rather than business owners going back and being ultra focused on recovering and survival of the recession that's coming, going back to those same processes and bureaucracy and structures, actually there is an appetite for change. And it seems like that people might be willing more to embrace innovation more intentionally and deliberately. And this is really what this presentation is about. If we can move to the next slide, please. There's a great Chinese proverb. You can't have a presentation without a great Chinese proverb, can you? So this one is, when the winds of change blows, some build walls while others build windmills. And it looks like, what is that? 82% of you are interested in potentially building windmills and looking at change as a positive thing. Can I go to the next slide, please? And this is some stories about people that want to build windmills rather than walls. At the start of the coronavirus lockdown, this was actually in California, Mr. Holmes' Bakehouse, the founder, a guy called Aaron Cadell, he really needed to decide how to stay in business. He, within 72 hours of lockdown, he lost £3 million worth of revenue, $3 million, sorry, worth of revenue. And he was going to lose all his staff. And so he had to radically change his business model. And so overnight, he developed baking kits. He saw that there was an opportunity, that people were baking from home. He went out to the supermarket, you might remember, there was no flour on the shelves. So he produced baking kits. He looked at what he had. He had a large warehouse. He had a large supply chain. And he had a good social media presence. He was big on Instagram. And so he decided that he would reach out and he would flip his business model to start providing baking kits. And that kept his staff in employment, which was his number one priority. So they did kits for cookies and scones and bread. And his business survives and kind of thrived in that adversity. Can I have the next slide, please? And so we're living in these extraordinary times, and you'll see it in the press, these words like uncertainty and complexity and rapid change and turbulence. We see it on a daily basis now. And you may have heard of this world, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. And this really says that the environment that we're currently living in has a number of dimensions that are uncontrollable. We can't control a lot of it. So we need to think about what we can control. Interestingly enough, the word VUCA was introduced in 1987 by US military to define that post-Cold War global security era. And it's gained popularity, and many of you will have heard of it. So, volatility is the speed of change in your industry, in the food industry at the moment, or in the world. Uncertainty is the extent to which we can predict the future, which at the moment is very challenging. Complexity, and COVID is full of complexity because it's the number of factors that we need to take into account, and businesses at the moment need to take a number of factors into account. And then ambiguity, that lack of clarity, that incomplete or imperfect information that we are all trying to get. It's that kind of fuzziness and vagueness and ideas, and all organizations are having to deal with that. Can I get the next slide, please? And so how do we stay competitive and profitable? Really important. How do we stay competitive and profitable and have a positive impact in this VUCA world that we have, that's fast changing, that's complex, that's uncertain? And how do we not only survive, but sustain? Because it's I would argue that it is no longer sufficient just to simply supply new products and services. What we need to do, and increasingly we're seeing companies that have to modify or completely redesign their entire business model. And business model innovation is what I want to talk about, is where we create that competitive advantage for the long term so that we can get that sustainability, growth, and that financial resilience that we're looking for. Use the word business model a few times. What do we mean by a business model? Because people mean lots of different things when we talk about a business model, and there are many definitions. But for me, probably the simplest way to describe a business model is how you make money or how you create value for your customers. Let's think about the internet boom that I lived through, certainly, and a number of you would have done. Most of those internets that started were trying to build a business model that attract huge crowds of people, huge crowds of followers, and people to visit their website, and then they were going to sell advertising to those people. That's a business model. Microsoft's business model was, let's sell software for $120 that costs us $50 to make. Very, very simple business model, and it's a way that we can turn our ideas into value propositions. Most business models have two parts. One is about, how do you make something, and the second part is activities associated with selling something that you have. Some of you will be familiar with this business model canvas that's up on the screen just now. That's Alex Osterwalder from Strategizer. And many of you may have done this for your businesses, but it's a kind of template. Construct and lay out your business or your hypothesis along these 9 different segments. But how do you go about designing a business model that's a winning one? And not only that, but how do you move beyond your current business model because it's failing, or it's running out of steam, or it's running out of gas, and your customers are actually leaving you to find alternatives? So how do you reinvent it? And that's what I want to jump into now. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. So this is about what business model innovation is. It's rethinking your current business around clear, but not always obvious to you, and it's not easy to do, but a customer need that realigns your resources, your processes, your profit formula, the construction of your costs and profits with a new value proposition. I'll give you an example. Amazon is a great example. They are the masters at business model innovation. You'll recall when Amazon launched in 1995, they wanted to be the Earth's biggest bookstore. Amazon now are a leader in cloud computing. They stream live content and content to our TV at home. They have virtual assistants sitting there. They've pivoted so many times. And that's because they are continuously willing to innovate. They are continuously willing to experiment. And a number of Amazon experiments haven't worked. You know, they've failed fast and they've moved on. So you need to think about how we rethink your business around customer needs to create that growth. And like I say, it will move many of you out of your comfort zones, but it's relevant because it reduces the risk of you being disrupted and it can position your business for survival. Can I have the next slide, please? Let me give you 3 quick examples, and these aren't food and drink examples. I will jump onto food and drink examples, but I wanted to give you 3 quick examples of business model innovation. The next slide. The first one is Hilti. So Hilti used to manufacture and sell tools, primarily to the construction industry, but their sales were stagnating. Chinese products were coming in and stealing their market. Cheap Chinese products were coming in and stealing their market massively. So their sales were stagnating. So they did a whole value proposition shift. They went and spoke to their customers. Really importantly, they spoke to their customers and they found out that customers wanted tools on demand. They wanted a reoccurring service. They didn't want to have to wait for tools. They didn't want to have broken tools and go and buy new ones. So they listened to their customers and they actually stopped manufacturing their tools and they went to paid a monthly subscription. They got their tools on demand, and because of that, they had a whole number of different key activities. They did replacement and repair, where they would take the tool away, replace it with another tool, repair it, and give it back to them. They had a new online service. They completely changed their cost structure and their revenue structure because it went to a reoccurring service. So a real famous case study of how you can pivot your business model. Think about TED Talks. They moved from a niche market to a mass market. So when TED began in California, they just had an annual conference each year for 800 people. It was a niche conference for kind of digital and artist people. In 2006, they put 6 of their talks online for millions. They now have 3,200 TED Talks online. It's a mass market. They've got an incredible brand. They invested in their brand. Ideas worth spreading. And they're now making revenue.
Sorry to interrupt, Chris.
Yep.
As you just over, so just be mindful of time, please.
Okay, no problem. Let's move on to the next slide, because I want to make this relevant to food and drink. Again, Fiona mentioned some local examples of food and drink, and with COVID, companies have been forced to shift. And so Munro's in Tain did a drive-through fruit and veg service where you drive through, you open the boot, and you phone the order, and they put the fruit and veg into your boot after your delivery. Inverness Whiskey Shop, they did virtual tastings on Zoom. They sent packs of around 5 whiskies and gins with taster kits out to Norway and Switzerland and Spain. And when you returned, they donated £5. When you returned the bottles, they donated £5 to the NHS. And then Goose in Your Hoose, these were an Edinburgh-based company that were doing pub quizzes. And of course, couldn't go any longer go into pubs, so they would put it on the Twitch platform to deliver nightly quizzes into people's homes. Can I just go to the last slide, please? So the next slide is actually just about another restaurant, if you want to look at this Canalis. Because one of the things I guess you're going to ask is that, well, that's all fine. It's great to hear these jump off points, but what can I do about it? And what I propose here is a framework where you can think about how you can develop your own business model. And where do you start? Because I don't have enough time to go through this model, but when you have new ideas, you need to think about how you can explore and invent and think to come up with new ideas and then test them. You need to build evidence and kill them quickly if they're not going to work. And this is a model that you can use, and maybe we can have another presentation where we can look at this model, but you need to reduce the risk of that idea by ensuring that customers want it, ensuring that it's commercially viable, and ensuring that you can feasibly deliver it. And then you have that and you design it for a high potential income. And you test it. You test it through this exploration phase to get it up into the top right-hand corner of the exploration square, where you have large financial potential return and strong evidence of success. And then you put it into your business and launch it. But you need lots of ideas to come through this explorations phase. So I guess in closing, it's crucial that kind of companies take positive action to analyze their current business models and continue to innovate, shifting from what I would suggest could be an outdated business model to one that ensures survivability and future growth. And this is a good model to start with. So thank you very much. I hope that's been useful.
Thank you so much, Chris. And sorry that we've had to cut you a little bit
That's
short.
okay. It's going to be tight.
But we will. We've got lots of potential for more. And if anyone has any questions for Chris or wants to get in touch with him afterwards, or any of our speakers, we can help you do that. So
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And now we're going to move to Dr. Julie Clark, Senior Lecturer in Division of Social Sciences at the University of West of Scotland. And over to you, Julie. Thank you.
Morning. I'm here with my colleague Gareth Rice. We're dividing the labour, so you'll get me for the presentation and Gareth will be handling the Q&A. As we've seen already, adapting to COVID is all about creativity, being creative in how you think and creative in what you do. What this short session does is it introduces the potential of strategic collaboration as a means of being creative, particularly for revitalising rural economies. The work we're talking about builds on lessons from research that we've done around the Loch Fyne area in Argyll and Bute, around a cluster of businesses there, and thinking very, very much about the advantages that rural areas have already and how the food and drink industry can capitalise on these. Next slide, please, Heather. We're going to talk about 3 key ideas. One of them is the idea of collaboration for branding. The next is businesses as a third space for community formation. And when we talk about that, we're thinking about being authentic in more than that strap on, just mention it sort of way. The third one is the idea of the experience economy, how we can collaborate to build an experience economy. Each of these ideas in turn will give benefits for the visitor, the destination, for the business and for the community from. So turning to the idea of collaboration for branding, we're thinking here really of the spatial access. We often think about businesses in terms of promoting, boosting business through marketing. Marketing can be considered a very demand way of working. You think about a competitive identity and means that the customer is the starting point. The place, the destination should adapt to visit the customer needs. The advent of COVID has offered an extraordinary challenge to rural businesses, which maybe don't have significant local markets to rely on, or maybe rely on international visitors that might be a long time coming back. It really has been a terrible thing for many, many people to try and be very creative within a short space of time here. So what we're thinking about is how collaboration can be used, and the idea of marketing can be contrasted with that of branding. Branding takes the identity of place as the start point. It looks not just at your business, but where it's situated and what are the locational assets, what are the unique selling points of that area more broadly. The idea of place and destination in tourism terms is quite fundamentally tied to branding. So when we think about collaboration and branding, we think about where your business is and who else is around you. What else is around you? How can you draw on that? You think about how your produce is fundamentally tied to a kind of place-based identity. The region and regional identity are means of building a brand. So think not just about your own business and what you do, but how you can work with other people around you. We've talked a little bit about the idea of authenticity being critical. It's something that's expected now, but collaboration gives you an authenticity in a very extended sort of way. You can think about you maybe provide something in the drinks industry, you have people around you who provide something in the food industry, you have other people around you who provide experiences that are more tied to the place. Can we skip to the next slide, please, Heather? What you've got there as a quick visual is a beer mat. It's advertising Loch Fyne ales. A couple of things to know about the idea of authenticity. It evokes the rural, but not in a traditional sort of way. We're not trying to sell sunshine. We're not trying to sell something that doesn't exist. It's the real place. There are many, many businesses around that area that all tap into the image of the loch and the loch as a locality. If you think about your brand as being place-based, you can work with other people around you and think spatially about who else is there that you can work with. You can also think about spatial in larger scales. What are the governance agencies? What are the support agencies that will support businesses in your area? What are the national level agencies that can support things in your area? Flip on, Heather, thank you. The second idea, beyond that of branding, we've talked about branding as being about place, but what kind of place do you want to have? Business can help form a third space for community formation. Tell you what I mean by that. The idea around a third place is we think of home as our first place, work as our second place, we spend a lot of time there. A third place is kind of a home away from home. Business can provide a sort of neutral ground. It can have regulars. It can be somewhere that sparks off conversation, somewhere that sparks off interaction. Businesses can either individually or with others in the area collaborate to provide third spaces, and communities can form in those third spaces. This must be something, it might be something like holding events. It might be something that's digital. You can think about your physical space, you can think about your digital space. When we talk about community formation, one of the things to focus on that gives you depth in authenticity, depth in being a local organisation, is thinking very much about how local people and different local skills can help signal your brand. You might be working with local produce. You emphasise that using the imagery in your business or the imagery you have online, the language you use talking about it. You signal the brand in that way, but also you're a provider of employment to local people. You can have other organisations, other skill sets coming in to be engaged in your business. Your business, either physically or digitally, can highlight people around you who work in crafts, who work in the arts, who work in other things that summon up that brand that you work with. So two things then. Firstly, you're drawing local skills. Secondly, you're emphasising that you're part of the local community. What you do there is, in the first instance, you're building your local base. Everyone in the local area effectively is an advert for you and what you do. But at a further remove, you might also be building a community of interest digitally. People who maybe won't come and visit you now, but might do in the future. People who are engaged in the sorts of food, the sorts of drink, and the sorts of local activities that you're advertising through the way you present yourself. So think about your business not just as something that sells food, sells drink, sells a tourism experience, but something that sells the area and something that is integral to the local community. Next slide, please, Heather. By way of thinking very quickly about how this might be done digitally, you've got an illustration there from Barra Atlantic Gin, which advertises itself as distilling on the edge. It's at the very, very edge of the country. Thinking about how they brand, you can see immediately there's visual images that evoke the place, that evoke not just that we have gin, but this is the local produce, this is the place it comes from. And the language they use is very much about community. You can see a little bit there. It is the people that live here in the island of Barra that are at the forefront of what we're trying to achieve. Through your help and our continuous work, we want to grow our island's fragile economy, fresh employment opportunities, hope for the youth of the island, stay, build a family, create a future, make the island a home. Very, very much community orientated. If you like, authenticity, branding are tied to place, and that raises all boats when interest in that area is sustained by collaboration with local people and collaboration with local businesses. Next slide, Heather, thank you. One of the things we've talked about spatial access, thinking about the place. We've talked a little bit about sectoral access when we talk about community. You can work with local community, you can work with local businesses. Experience economy brings these two together. And another way of considering your business is thinking about what actually happens, what do you do? Traditionally, again, this has been in terms of events, actually hosting people, but now we have to think more broadly. We have to think more digitally about how we can engage people. With the experience economy, you're thinking about delivering distinctiveness and authenticity by offering experiences. Experiences make things memorable, they make things meaningful, they build loyalty. The experience economy is usually thought about along 4 different categories, about the aesthetic, the escapist, the educational, the entertainment. There's some quick images that you can see to the side there. All of these things are local businesses that have been brought together, hanging on one area. You've got a very, very small business, an individual trader carving spoons. You've got Find Fest, which brings together food, beer, drink, music. You've got illustrations of people doing workshops, and you've got evocative images of place that are appearing digitally. One of the things to think about is how you can collaborate and bring in other people who are involved in relevant things. That might be proximate to you, it might be local, it might be physical, it might be sole traders, it might be musicians who can do something in play. But digitally, you can also connect them. You can link through different communities over the internet. A good example there is that little Meet the Brewers option. Again, historically, that's bringing people physically together, but think not just about people in your local area, think about other people who are a community of interest further abroad. I'm going to jump to the last slide, I think, because we're running tight on time. Thanks, Heather. So 3 key points to think about. In terms of branding, one of the way authenticity works is generating it from the grassroots up. You're building your brand at multiple scales within and beyond the local area. When you're collaborating, think out to reaching out to people who are in your physical area who are complementary, but also in your digital area who are complementary. Second idea, community involvement, is very much at the core of collaboration. Think of designing a holistic digital strategy. What you're doing there is making sure that you're reaching out both to local people and profiling the area that you work in as well. Again, we raise all boats, raising interest in the area we work in. You might not get visitors now, but you can make visitors want to visit in the future. Varagin, again, huge outreach, and a lot of what it does is profile place, look to future interest. Thirdly, think about offering experiences through digital as well as COVID-safe real-life events. And again, as has been given examples before, you can root them in the consumption and production of locally produced food, drink and crafts. There's a lot to be done. Think spatially. Who is your local area? Branding isn't just about your business, it's about the local area, and you can connect with people and generate interest. And think also about that sectoral issue. What can you do with schools, with complementary businesses, with other businesses that are relevant to a niche interest, maybe gin, maybe beer, maybe cheese, whatever, but are more displaced. Final slide, Heather, please. So just to close, think about collaboration because it's got multiple layered benefits. For the visitor, you're highlighting different things in the area, you've got a pull to the area, you get co-benefits from other people being interested in businesses locally. For the destination, you're raising its profile. For your own business, be broad, be creative about where you look to. And for the local community, be very, very clear about what you deliver from them, and they're an ongoing advert for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was great. Got so much to think about so far from the speakers that we've heard this morning. And now I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Lorna Young, Marketing and Business Development Consultant and co-author of Savour the Flavours. And she's going to talk about the results of some recent research conducted in Dumfries and Galloway. So welcome, Lorna.
Thank you, Leslie. I'd like to start by giving an overview of our food tourism journey in Dumfries and Galloway and how we're using that research to support and inform the recovery from lockdown. Could we move on, Heather? Savour the Flavours has had quite a few different iterations over the years, and from a food tourism point of view, the main development activity started about 10 years ago when we had a leader-funded project that actually ran for about 4.5 years, and it was quite transformative in creating a food tourism culture here. Because while Savour the Flavours is a regional food brand, what we realised very quickly was that food and drink and the tourism sectors in Dumfries and Galloway are very deeply intertwined, and they're actually quite codependent. So you can't really tackle one without tackling the other. So food tourism became a real focus of that project. And one of the most important things we did was the creation of a dispersed regional food festival. So in a large rural area with no particular mass focal point for population, rather than a single site food festival, we took a 2-week period and held about 100 to 150 events that were held at business premises across the region. And while on the surface it looked like a food festival, what it really was it an opportunity, a reason to give us to work with local small businesses to help them to develop food tourism experiences. So, for example, we worked with local producers to help them think about how they could create tourism experiences within their production business. So things like artisan bakers holding bread making workshops, that kind of thing. And the development process for that was almost a simplified version of what Chris touched on. And one of the key things that we did was help business owners understand that what they see as maybe quite ordinary and everyday about their business is actually fascinating and can be tweaked to provide a really interesting food tourism experience. So it's that taking a step back from your business and try to figure out what it is that you might be able to offer. We also worked with accommodation providers and food service businesses to add new experiences to their offering too, and usually that involved a degree of collaboration. So we had everything from producer-led tasting menus to even a wild food forage in an art gallery. But what was important about that project then was the culture of collaboration that it left in the region. So both in networks and in just the way that local businesses work together. Can we move on to the next slide, Heather? And this is just a little bit of an overview of what's happened since the original Save the Flavours ceased in 2003. We've had farmers markets, associations like the Fleece and Galway markets and major food festivals and diversified food businesses. So when COVID hit in mid-May, we felt we became aware of quite an urgent need to create a safe space where these smaller businesses could come together to support each other. Could you move on to the next slide, Heather? And one of the first things that was decided when we brought these small businesses together was the need for research to help them inform their business restart planning. There was a lot of questions, a lot of we don't know if. So the survey was really very much focused on local people and local communities to try and inform the local business response. And like many surveys that have taken place during COVID, could we move on, Heather? A lot of the key findings that came out were about an enormous swing to local. Now, for us in a rural area, that was partly about necessity, but what was quite clear as well was that there was a sustained intention to purchase local that people wanted. But one of the main things was they wanted it to be easier and more convenient for them to buy local. But we also had quite a lot of comment opportunities within that survey, and digging a little bit deeper gave us real insight into how we can use those findings to inform business restart and also look at food tourism adaptation in the longer term. We move on, Heather. One of the most important findings that we saw was the clear need that people wanted local businesses to prioritise local people and local communities above the needs of visitors. People in rural areas they know that tourism is important. They know that there's lots of local jobs dependent on it, but tourism isn't more important than the needs of the local people who live there. And that's given our businesses and our food and drink organisations quite a lot to think about. And it's actually sparked quite a lot of innovative ideas. For example, some of our farmers market traders are now speaking with a couple of holiday parks about bringing an evening farmers market into the middle of the holiday park, with the idea that we're taking what could be a point of tension, which is large volumes of rural visitors going into small towns, and trying to turn that into a food tourism experience that actually adds value to the visitor experience. And people were also very, very clear that they wanted it to be easier and more convenient to buy local. Now, when we started this survey, we made a bit of an assumption that digital would be one of the main outcomes. But the results actually suggested that digital was only desirable if it functioned in a way that made purchasing local food easier. Digital isn't a solution necessarily in itself. And I think when we think about shopping behaviour, buying food and drink is much more than just a functional thing, it's a social thing, it's a celebratory thing. And popping out in and out shops on a small high street is a pleasure, whereas going through half a dozen online checkouts is a bit of a headache. So it's about understanding, I think, the looking at digital more as a tool, and if we can bring in a little bit of that social and personal connection through that digital experience and make it enjoyable for people, we're on to a bit of a winner. Could we go on to the next slide, Heather? The overriding message that came through in a lot of the comments was that people wanted the feeling that they matter. Ultimately, I think food tourism is all about people and experiences, and that creates an opportunity for the food and drink industry and for the tourism industry to look at how you can then capitalise on that. And that opportunity is why we think food tourism presents such a valuable opportunity for Scotland right now. Could we move on? So in planning ahead then and looking at how these results can start to inform food tourism development and business restart and recovery. Here are some of the key things that we've discussed with some of our local businesses. One of the most important things is to focus on experience, and food tourism is quite an easy way to create that sensory added value experience and these moments of surprise. The kind of things that you want to share on social media, the things that stay in your memory. It's about this multi-sensory experience. Food tourism is also an approach that lets you as a business owner focus on your particular strengths. So businesses that are particularly good at product development or particularly good at customer service, it allows you to adapt your approach so that you can really amplify what it is about your business that people respond to. The local and the place within the food tourism process is really important, and it's quite a valuable source of inspiration, and it's worth spending some time thinking about the 3 Ps, which would be the people, produce and place. So are there other people that you could be collaborating with? Are there other local produce that you could showcase? And how can you use your place to leverage impact, whether that's your local landscape or your local community? And above all, an overriding theme that's come out when we've been talking to small businesses post-COVID is the importance of focusing on your margins. When we're in this industry, it's very easy to be creative and to come up with lots of great ideas, but we have to always be mindful of profitability and making sure that what you're introducing works for you in a business sense. So in summing up, I've got 3 points. Could we move on? First of all, think about the value that a local focus can add to your business. Now, that might mean for a tourism business, you're looking more to a local market, or it might mean looking at how local assets like produce can add value. So this young chef, Fraser Cameron, works at the Globe Inn in Dumfries. He's quite an exceptional young chef, and he's also the chef ambassador for Galloway Beef. And that's a very mutual beneficial relationship from marketing to menu development. It works for both parties. And in fact, while Fraser has been furloughed because the restaurant has been shut, he's been able to use that relationship with the Galloway Cattle Society to do some recipe development to help them to prepare for a Christmas campaign. So it's created a bit of resilience there by having that partnership. Secondly, the next slide. I think in a post-COVID world, it's really important to think about how you're delivering the products and experiences. So the emotional aspect of what you do. One of the things that came out quite strongly within the survey was that people are increasingly making decisions based on how they feel, and in particular, whether they feel safe. So as well as making safety measures very visible, such as that image there shows, it's a good idea to think about that 20% of the population that feel particularly vulnerable and how you can maybe meet their needs. So As an example, one of the cafes down here has introduced a weekly hour that they've called an extra social distancing hour, with the intention that it's not just the minimum guidelines, it's twice the social distancing recommended. The idea that they want to create a place where the very vulnerable members in their local community can feel safe, and these are people who probably wouldn't have gone back to a cafe otherwise. And lastly, if you move on, I think it's quite important to keep in mind that COVID has changed everything, and it's changed how everybody is running businesses. And what that means, particularly for small businesses in this industry, it might mean that the business you want to run and the business you had planned to run, it's just not possible right now. So one of the key things to focus on is in the short term, understand that it might take a wee while to get back to what you had before. So focus on surviving this in the short term and doing what you can, rather than thinking about what you've maybe lost. So as an example of this, one of the biggest food festival in Dumfries and Galloway is Stranraer Oyster Festival. There's absolutely no way that it can run this autumn. It's a mass audience event. But the community are marking the festival weekend probably by popping a little oyster bar up in the town centre, just to bring a little bit of that food festival, food tourism celebration back into the heart of the community. So it's thinking about what you can do while we plan ahead for what the longer term solutions might be. To sum up, I would just repeat what a lot of the other speakers have said, that food tourism is a massive opportunity, particularly for rural Scotland. But the focusing on local people, place and produce is probably the key to creating really exciting food tourism products.
Great, thank you so much, Lorna. We're going to thank you very much to all 4 of the speakers as well. I think there's such interesting themes. I've scribbled loads of notes here and some key points. We're going to move into the Q&A now. So if anybody has any questions for the speakers, do please post them into the chat box. I guess just looking at all the notes that I've scribbled here, just going from kind of thinking about culinary travellers, thinking about local, looking at your business models, to the ideas and the opportunities. Thinking about authenticity, communities and place, all really important things to consider with the changes of COVID, and thinking about your experience and your local connections as well. So we've got a couple of questions here, so I'll just get started. We've got one here. How do the panel perceive that organisations can help small food and food tourism connect and collaborate, and not just in rural locations? So I wonder if we go to Julie or Gareth on that one.
Yeah, thanks very much. I've been listening there quite carefully. Some fantastic points coming through. I think in terms of the connection, one of the things that we mentioned before was scale. So you've got like the local produce, but if you're able to tie yourself into a larger narrative, and one of the things here that like we thought about was how you, if you like, multiplex your brand and your place into the wider national narrative Scotland, perhaps through the Minister for Rural Affairs and Natural Environment. So you could obviously use some political clout and capital to be part of the bigger picture. So that would kind of elevate what you're doing on a larger scale, and also connect you to businesses. So you're doing like similar things across the country. As well, because of course, when it comes to making all this work, it's a collection of disparate groups that are involved, some of whom you may not know, but they're all involved in the bigger picture stuff. So I think it's trying to strengthen those like relationships. If you like, it's called the weak ties. There's academic work that talks about weak ties and strong ties. So you'd be talking about the weak ties here, ones that are not really local to you, but can be highly effective, and trying to get you connected and multiplexed into those wider national networks. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Gareth. I don't know if any of the other speakers have got a comment on that question at all. No? Okay. Happy to move on to the next question then. So We've had a really nice comment from one of the speakers talking about how many video conferences he's attended since lockdown, and this has been the most compelling. So I guess thank you to the speakers for sharing your research and the work that you've been doing. He's also just asking the question, within destinations across Scotland, who is driving the community focus of food tourism? I don't know, Fiona, if it's good to come to you on that one from a food and drink perspective.
Thank you. I mean, the word community we're hearing over and over again just now, which is, you know, in a certain way, one of the things I was going to mention earlier was the work we're doing with regional food groups across Scotland. Sort of a new scheme whereby we're giving some support to groups across the country, and they're tasked with strengthening the food and drink and tourism collaborations in their areas. So these groups, you know, feature everything from the producers to hospitality businesses to a whole, you know, agritourism, a whole mix. And, you know, it's really important that these groups are, you know, continue their great work in doing delivering activities for their communities, and as Benjamin has said, making them realise that they're part of that economy. So I think the more that we can strengthen the regions, you know, the better we're going to be sort of nationally. And I know Visit Scotland are doing a lot of work on the whole community piece. It's coming at all levels, really, in all the strategic plans that are happening at a national level. So I think we're going to see a real shift in that area.
Great, thanks, Fiona. Does anybody else have a comment on that particular question? Okay. We've got another question, I guess, just on from that, still from the same speaker, just thinking about, do local food producers now recognise that they're an integral part of the visitor economy? I don't know if any of the speakers have got an opinion on that one.
Yeah, I would say down in our experience, the Fleece and Galway, yes, they do, and vice versa, that tourism operators and food services are a really important part of the food and drink sector. So there is a significant crossover between the two sectors. And I think the more that you can facilitate local collaboration and that has its roots really in communication, and make sure that there's really strong communication flows. I think these two sectors, they just help each other, and the more that we can strengthen links between them, the better.
Great, thank you, Lorna. Does anybody else have any input onto that one? Okay, just thinking about and coming back to, I guess, Chris, the business models and the ideas and the opportunities. From a university perspective, are you seeing, I guess, a lot of businesses reaching out for support in that area, or indeed other support within kind of food and drink departments?
Yes, very much so. I mean, this is time for creative thinkers and problem solvers to be innovative and entrepreneurial. Real opportunities there, and I think that, you know, we should never underestimate the power of the entrepreneur at this time. A number of successful businesses have grown during times of adversity, but you can't get away from the fundamental is that you have to produce something that customers want. You know, people have to want it, so the customer has to remain the focus of anything that you're doing. You have to create value to the customer, and there's a number of ways that you can do that. But I think, yeah, we're seeing it particularly in what we do, and not just in food and drink, but across all sectors. So particularly health and social care, we're working with them, and you know, I was speaking to, you know, the NHS Grampian recently, and they said that they have, you know, within the space of, you know, 10 weeks, they've moved 10 years. They've moved where they want to be, you know, in 10 years. So incredible pace of change just now, and uncertainty. And so looking, you know, at how you manage that in maybe a systematic way is what companies are looking for just now.
Great, thanks, Chris. Just an additional question that's come through just around those specific models. are there kind of COVID-19 specific models that can support businesses at this time, or do entrepreneurs depend kind of on their own ingenuity to solve problems and the challenges that are coming through?
I've seen a few models. I mean, there are loads of models and frameworks. You know, you can kind of Google them, and it's right that companies and organisations. So this isn't just startup companies or SMEs. You know, any organisations, public sector organisations, you know, councils, the NHS can look at these models, and they kind of have to fit with what it is that they're trying to do. Otherwise, you kind of can get consumed by, and you know, making money or, you know, providing value to the customers. I think you can spend a lot of time working in canvases and models and things like that. So they really have to be meaningful and, you know, enrich what it is that you're doing. But I have seen frameworks. So I have seen universities using kind of frameworks to help them to navigate the VUCA model to respond to COVID, you know, setting up action teams to deal with the complexity, and then maybe a response leadership team to deal with the volatility, the speed of change, and how that manages. So there are frameworks that have been developed specifically to respond to COVID, but that may not be applicable to the individual business that you have. But certainly as a starting point for business model innovation, I would look at the strategizer model that I kind of presented, this explore. It's very simple. It's broken down to explore, exploit. But you know what you need there is lots of ideas, and see how they fit in this kind of. And you need to experiment, and you need to kill ideas kind of quickly if they're not working, if they're not moving up that graphic, then they need to be killed quickly, because you need to build evidence to see that they're going to be kind of sustainable and desirable, but also going to bring in the expected return that you need.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chris. We've got another question here around collaboration and the practical point on supporting and what is actually available at this time to help businesses to collaborate. Just think about how hard it is to lift focus from survival into doing something around collaboration. I guess, Leslie, I don't know if you'd like to pick that up from maybe an interface perspective, but just thinking about the support environment for businesses at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fiona has probably got some resources that we can make available in terms of helping businesses to collaborate. But yes, interface, we've got, as I say, we're well placed across the country. I don't know where the speaker, the participant is based, but ideal for when there's a common challenge around a certain issue. I've been involved in lots of projects where we get businesses, small groups of businesses together, and we can, you know, chat to some of the business engagement team, to myself, if you've got an idea, depending on what you want to collaborate on, or test out an idea, could be research. In our Adopt a Business scheme, we've recently matched around 80 tourism businesses with academics and student projects to look at all kinds of things, from could be digital capabilities, visitor intelligence. So there's lots of scope. And you know, if you've got an idea or you have a question, you want to get in touch, please do. And between ourselves and all the speakers today and Fiona and the resources that she can provide, I'm sure we can give you some more information.
Great, thank you very much, Leslie. Well, that's us come to the end of the Q&A. Thank you so much to those that put questions forward, and a big thank you again to our speakers. So I'll just hand over to Leslie now to close today's session, but thank you from me for attending.
Thank you, Heather, and a big thank you to all our speakers, to Fiona Richmond, to Chris Mull, to Julie Clark and Gareth Rice, and to Lorna Young. I've got tons of notes as well. Lots of things to think about, lots of inspiration. And Heather, are you able to move to the last slide, the information slide? Basically, just to say that, yeah, we hope that you found today's session useful, that you've maybe got some tips and ideas, takeaways, and inspiration. We will follow up with you. We can provide the speaker slides. We are going to collate a lot of the business takeaways for you. We've got speaker bios and profiles. If you want to get in touch with any of our speakers or with us, We just want to reinforce to you that universities are open for business, and they're open to business to support the recovery and rebuild the impacts of COVID-19. We're here to help you make connections. Our details are there on screen. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to all our speakers, and we look forward to hearing from you and doing some more sessions in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.